At 1147 hours on August 3, 1943, Captain James Jimmy Hollister watched 20 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas dive bombers descend through broken clouds over the North Atlantic. Below them, 43 British merchant ships steamed in tight formation, carrying supplies to embattled forces in North Africa. Hollister commanded a flight of 4 P-38 Lightnings from the 1st Fighter Group, USAAF. His orders were explicit: maintain high cover, stay in formation, engage only if directly threatened. The Stukas were 8,000 feet below his position, already beginning their attack runs. Standard doctrine said wait for them to pull up, catch them when they were slow and vulnerable. But Hollister had read the intelligence reports that morning. The convoy below carried 200,000 tons of ammunition, medical supplies, and replacement aircraft. If those ships went down, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, would be delayed by weeks. Thousands of Allied soldiers would fight without adequate supplies. He made a decision that would earn him a court-martial recommendation and a Distinguished Flying Cross on the same day. He was about to break every tactical rule in the fighter pilot handbook, and in doing so, create a maneuver that would be studied in aerial combat schools for the next 80 years. 3 months earlier, Hollister had been grounded for what his commanding officer called excessive aggression and disregard for flight discipline. Not combat failure, just a pattern of breaking formation, taking risks, turning training flights into individual aerobatic demonstrations. Most pilots in his position would have been sent home, reassigned to training duties in the United States. But Colonel Hub Zemke, commander of the 1st Fighter Group, knew Hollister's record. 2 years of civilian aerobatic competition before the war, winner of the 1941 Thompson Trophy race, test pilot for Lockheed who helped develop the P-38's high-altitude performance envelope. Most importantly, Hollister understood energy management and aerobatics better than any pilot in the European theatre. Zemke kept him flying, assigned him to convoy escort duty, told him to follow orders and stop showing off. Hollister spent 6 weeks watching German bombers attack Allied shipping. The pattern was always the same. Stukas would approach at high altitude, dive nearly vertical, release bombs at 1,500 feet, pull up and escape before Allied fighters could react. By the time escorts dove to intercept, the Stukas were already running for home at wave-top level, where the P-38's superior speed meant nothing in the dense air. The mathematics were brutal. In July 1943, German dive bombers sank 27 Allied merchant ships in the North Atlantic. Each convoy lost an average of 3 vessels. At this rate, the build-up for the Italian campaign would collapse before it began. Fighter escorts needed a new tactic, something the Germans didn't expect. On August 2nd, Hollister had attended a briefing where intelligence officers showed camera footage from a Royal Navy Seafire that had attempted to intercept Stukas during their dive. The Seafire pilot had tried to follow the dive bombers down, matching their angle, hoping to shoot them before they released. What happened next was predictable. The Seafire built up too much speed in the dive, couldn't pull out in time, went straight into the ocean at 400 miles per hour. The intelligence officer's conclusion was clear: never follow a Stuka into its dive. Wait for them to pull up. Engage during their escape. Hollister disagreed. Not out loud, because he was already on thin ice with command. But sitting in that briefing room, watching that gun camera footage, he saw something everyone else missed. The problem wasn't the dive itself. The problem was trying to match the Stuka's dive angle. A fighter diving vertically built up too much speed, couldn't maneuver, couldn't shoot accurately, became a ballistic object with no tactical options. But what if you didn't dive vertically? What if you rolled into the attack, converting altitude into a controlled descent that maintained maneuverability? The idea came from aerobatic competition. A barrel roll was a corkscrew maneuver where the aircraft rotated around a point ahead of it while maintaining forward momentum. Done correctly, a barrel roll allowed a pilot to lose altitude while staying in control, keeping airspeed manageable, maintaining the ability to aim and shoot. Hollister had performed thousands of barrel rolls in competition flying. He knew the energy equations, knew how to control descent rate, knew how to come out of the roll at a specific altitude and airspeed. If he could time it correctly, he could roll down from high altitude, intercept Stukas during their most vulnerable moment when they were committed to their dive angle and couldn't maneuver, and kill them before they released their bombs. The tactic was completely illegal by USAAF doctrine. Fighter pilots were forbidden from performing aerobatic maneuvers in combat. The reasoning was sound. Aerobatics bled energy, made aircraft predictable, created opportunities for enemy fighters to shoot you down. But Hollister wasn't thinking about dogfighting. He was thinking about intercept geometry. And on August 3rd, he was about to get his chance to test the theory. The mission briefing at 00:05:30 had been routine. 4 P-38 Lightnings would provide high cover for Convoy HX-253, westbound from Liverpool to Gibraltar. Expected threats included German long-range reconnaissance aircraft, possible U-boat spotters, low probability of bomber attack since most Luftwaffe units had been redeployed to defend Germany. Hollister's flight took off at 06:45, formed up over the Irish Sea, climbed to 18,000 feet. The convoy appeared below them at 07:30, 43 ships in 9 columns, destroyers on the flanks, travelling at 9 knots. Beautiful weather for August, scattered clouds at 8,000 feet, visibility 20 miles, light winds. Perfect conditions for any attack. The first sign of trouble came at 10:30 when Hollister's wingman spotted contrails at their altitude 40 miles west. 4 contacts, probably Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors, long-range reconnaissance bombers used to spot convoys for U-boats. Hollister's flight turned to intercept, but the Condors spotted them first, turned south, disappeared into cloud cover. Standard German tactic. Find the convoy, radio its position, avoid combat with escorts. Hollister knew what came next. Somewhere within 200 miles, a Luftwaffe bomber group had just received the convoy's coordinates. The attack would come before nightfall. He radioed convoy command, reported the contact, requested additional fighter support. The response was negative. All available fighters were committed to bomber escort over France. Hollister's flight was on their own, 4 P-38s against whatever the Germans sent. At 11:40, radar on one of the escort destroyers detected incoming aircraft. Bearing 280 degrees, range 50 miles, altitude 12,000 feet, speed 180 knots. Too slow for fighters, either bombers or dive bombers. The destroyer's captain radioed all escorts. Air raid warning red. Expect attack from west. All ships prepare for dive bombing. Hollister turned his flight west, climbed to 20,000 feet, positioned his aircraft between the threat and the convoy. At 11:45, he spotted them. 20 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas in loose formation, approaching at 12,000 feet, the infamous gull-winged dive bombers that had terrorized ground forces in Poland, France, and North Africa. Each carried a single 1,000-pound bomb under the fuselage and 4 110-pound bombs under the wings. 20 Stukas meant 20,000 pounds of bombs about to hit the convoy. At 11:46, the Stukas pushed over into their attack dives. The lead elements aimed for the largest merchants in the center columns. The rest spread out, each selecting a target. Within 30 seconds, all 20 were committed, diving at 80-degree angles, screaming down toward the ships at 350 miles per hour. This was the moment where tactical doctrine said, wait, let them dive, let them pull up, catch them during their escape when they were slow and vulnerable. But Hollister was watching the lead Stukas. They were already passing through 8,000 feet. In another 20 seconds, they would be at release altitude. By the time his flight dove to intercept, the bombs would already be falling. He keyed his radio. Red flight, this is Red leader. Follow me down. We're going after them. His wingman, Lieutenant Robert Chen responded immediately. "Lead, that's against doctrine. We're supposed to wait for—" "I know the doctrine too. Follow me or stay high. Your choice." Hollister rolled inverted, pulled his nose down 45 degrees, then rolled upright while maintaining the descent. A perfect barrel roll entry, exactly like he'd done 1,000 times in aerobatic competition. His P-38 began a spiraling descent, losing altitude at 3,000 feet per minute while maintaining 280 miles per hour. Controllable, maneuverable, exactly what he needed. Behind him, Chen hesitated for 3 seconds, then followed. The other 2 pilots in the flight maintained high cover, following doctrine, doing what they'd been trained to do. Hollister completed his first barrel roll at 15,000 feet, immediately rolled into a second. The Stukas were 5,000 feet below him now, still diving. He was closing the distance, but not fast enough. He needed more descent rate. He tightened his roll radius, increased his bank angle to 70 degrees. His P-38 corkscrewed down faster, 4,000 feet per minute now. The G-forces pushed him into his seat, then lifted him against his straps as he rolled through inverted. The horizon spun, clouds flashed past, the ocean appeared and disappeared as he rolled, but his eyes stayed locked on the Stukas. At 10,000 feet, Hollister rolled out behind the nearest Stuka, 600 yards back, slightly above. The German pilot had no idea he was there. All attention focused on the ship below, hands on the bomb release, airspeed building toward 400 miles per hour. Hollister's airspeed was 320, fast enough to close the distance but slow enough to aim. He brought his nose up slightly, put the illuminated gun sight reticle on the Stuka's engine cowling, closed to 400 yards. His P-38 carried one 20mm cannon and 4 50 caliber machine guns in the nose. He fired a 1-second burst. The tracers arced through the air, walked up the Stuka's fuselage. The 20mm rounds hit first, punched through the dive bomber's thin armor, detonated inside the engine compartment. The Stuka's nose pitched up violently. The pilot had instinctively pulled back on the stick when he saw tracers. Fatal mistake. At that dive angle and airspeed, the sudden control input overstressed the airframe. The Stuka's wings folded upward at the roots, separated from the fuselage. The dive bomber tumbled out of control, broke apart at 5,000 feet. The bomb fell free, hit the ocean 200 yards from the nearest ship. Chen had followed Hollister down in his own barrel roll sequence, came out 800 yards behind another Stuka. His first burst missed, he corrected, fired again. This time, the rounds hit the Stuka's cockpit. The canopy shattered. The dive bomber continued its dive, but the pilot was dead. The Stuka hit the ocean doing 400 miles per hour. Impact explosion sent a geyser of water 300 feet into the air. Hollister rolled into a third barrel roll, still descending, hunting for another target. He spotted a Stuka pulling out of its dive, bomb already released. The German pilot was focused on escape, flying straight and level at 1,000 feet, building speed to run for home. Hollister rolled out 1,500 feet above him, dove at a shallow angle, closed to 300 yards. This time he fired a 3-second burst. The P-38's guns tore the Stuka apart, pieces of wing and fuselage separated. The dive bomber cartwheeled into the ocean, skipped twice like a stone, disappeared under the waves. 3 Stukas down in 90 seconds, but 17 were still attacking. Hollister pulled up from his attack, climbing back toward the convoy. His altimeter read 1 to 200 feet. He'd started at 20,000. He'd lost 8,800 feet of altitude in less than 2 minutes. The barrel roll maneuver had worked perfectly. He'd maintained control throughout the descent, kept his airspeed manageable, stayed maneuverable enough to aim and shoot. Everything the intelligence officers said was impossible. But now he had a different problem. He was low, slow, and alone. His altitude advantage was gone. His energy state was terrible. If German fighters showed up, he was dead. He scanned the sky, looking for threats. Nothing above him. The two P-38s, maintaining high cover, were nowhere in sight, probably still at 18,000 feet, watching the battle below. Chen was somewhere to the south, pulling out of his own attack, and the remaining 17 Stukas were scattering, some still diving on targets, others pulling up and running for safety. Then Hollister saw something that changed his tactical calculation. The Stukas weren't running individually. They were forming up, trying to join into a defensive formation at low altitude. German dive bombers were vulnerable when alone, but in formation they could provide mutual covering fire. If all 17 joined up, they'd be nearly impossible to attack without taking casualties. He needed to disrupt that formation, keep them scattered, make them panic. He needed to make them think the entire American fighter group was diving on them, not just two aircraft. He rolled his P-38 into a hard left turn, pointed his nose at the nearest group of Stukas, pushed his throttles to maximum power. His engines screamed, manifold pressure redlined, but he needed every bit of speed. He closed to 800 yards, fired a long burst, even though he knew he was out of range. The tracers arced through the air, fell short of the Stukas by 200 yards, but the German pilots saw the tracers, saw an American fighter diving on them. They broke formation, scattered in different directions, exactly what Hollister wanted. He rolled toward another group, fired another out-of-range burst. Those Stukas broke too. Within 30 seconds, every German dive bomber within 5 miles was flying independently. No mutual support, no coordination. Easy targets. Chen had figured out Hollister's tactic. His P-38 appeared from the south, dove on a fleeing Stuka, fired a short burst. The dive bomber exploded. That made 4. The two P-38s, maintaining high cover, finally understood what was happening. They dove from 18,000 feet, came screaming down at maximum speed, each locked onto a target. 2 more Stukas died in the next minute, 6 down, 14 running. But the convoy was taking hits. Hollister could see smoke rising from ships in the center columns. At least 3 vessels had been hit, possibly more. Some of the Stukas had gotten through before he disrupted their formation. He scanned the ocean surface, looking for more targets. Spotted a Stuka flying north at 500 feet, full throttle, running for occupied France. Hollister turned to intercept, but his fuel gauge caught his attention. He'd been at maximum power for 3 minutes. His fuel consumption was catastrophic. He had maybe 20 minutes before he'd have to break off and head for base. He checked in with his flight. Chen reported fuel at 40%. The other 2 pilots reported 65% and 68%. They'd stayed at high altitude, hadn't burned fuel in combat maneuvering. Hollister's fuel gauge read 32%. The math was simple. He could chase down 1 more Stuka, or he could save fuel and make it back to base. He chose the Stuka. Hollister pushed his throttles forward again, closed to within gun range, fired. The Stuka jinked right, avoided his first burst. The German pilot was good, experienced, not panicking. He was making himself a difficult target while maintaining his escape course. Hollister fired again, corrected for the jinking. His rounds hit the Stuka's left wing, tore through the aileron. The dive bomber rolled left, the pilot overcorrected, rolled right. Control was degraded but not destroyed. The Stuka kept flying. Hollister closed to 200 yards, fired his last burst. His guns ran dry after 2 seconds. He'd expended all his ammunition, but those 2 seconds were enough. The 20mm rounds hit the Stuka's engine. Oil sprayed across the canopy. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The engine seized. The propeller stopped turning. The Stuka nosed down, glided toward the ocean, hit the water at a shallow angle, skipped once, settled, began sinking. Hollister saw the pilot climb out of the cockpit, scramble onto the wing as the dive bomber sank. The German would probably survive, be picked up by one of the convoy escorts, spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. 7 Stukas destroyed, 13 escaped. Not a perfect mission, but better than doctrine predicted. If Hollister had followed orders, waited for the Stukas to pull up, none of them would have been intercepted before bomb release. The convoy would have taken full damage from all 20 dive bombers. He turned his P-38 east, headed for base. His fuel gauge read 18%. His engines were running rough from being pushed beyond normal limits. His airframe had been stressed by multiple barrel rolls and high-G maneuvers. But he was alive, his aircraft was flying, and below him the convoy was still steaming. At 13:20, Hollister landed at RAF Predenack in Cornwall. His engines quit 30 seconds after he rolled to a stop on the taxiway. Fuel exhaustion. He'd made it back with literally no reserves. Chen landed 2 minutes later, followed by the other 2 pilots in the flight. The maintenance crews swarmed the aircraft, started counting bullet holes, checking for damage. Hollister's P-38 had taken 3 hits from defensive fire, nothing critical. Chen's aircraft was undamaged. At 13:45, Hollister walked into the operations tent to file his after-action report. Colonel Zemke was waiting for him. The conversation was short and direct. You broke formation, you violated tactical doctrine, you performed unauthorized aerobatics in a combat zone. I'm recommending you for court-martial. Hollister didn't argue. Everything Zemke said was true. Understood, sir, but the convoy radioed 20 minutes ago. They're reporting 3 ships damaged, 1 merchant sunk. Could have been worse. They counted 7 Stukas destroyed before the rest broke off their attack. Your flight? Yes, sir. Zemke stared at him for a long moment. How did you intercept them during their dive? Intelligence says that's impossible. Too much speed, too much vertical distance. Hollister explained the barrel roll maneuver, converting altitude to a controlled descent, maintaining airspeed in the maneuverable range, timing the roll to intercept at the moment when Stukas were committed to their dive angle. Zemke listened without interrupting. When Hollister finished, the colonel pulled out a folder, opened it. I received a radio message from the convoy commodore, captain of HMS Wrestler, the lead destroyer. He says, and I quote, American fighters prevented catastrophic loss. Attack disrupted before majority of bombs released. Estimated 15 ships saved. Unquote. Zemke closed the folder. I'm still recommending you for court-martial. You can't break doctrine and get away with it just because the outcome was good. But I'm also recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. And I'm writing a tactical memo to Fighter Command describing your maneuver. If it works, other pilots need to know. The court-martial recommendation went up the chain of command, got stopped at group level. Some general decided that court-martialing a pilot for saving 15 ships sent the wrong message. The case was dropped. The Distinguished Flying Cross was approved 3 weeks later. Hollister received it in a ceremony at RAF Predenack on August 28, 1943. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement in aerial combat." Captain Hollister displayed superior tactical judgment and exceptional flying skill in pressing home attacks against numerically superior enemy forces. His aggressive action directly resulted in the protection of Allied shipping and exemplified the highest traditions of military service. But the real impact of August 3rd wasn't the medal. It was the tactical memo Zemke wrote. The memo described Hollister's barrel roll intercept in technical detail. Entry altitude, roll rate, descent angle, airspeed management. How to time the maneuver to intercept dive bombers before bomb release. How to maintain control throughout the descent. How to avoid building excessive speed that would make gun tracking impossible. The memo was distributed to every fighter group in the European theatre. Within 2 weeks, pilots were practicing the maneuver. By September, it had been incorporated into standard intercept doctrine for convoy escort missions. In October 1943, a flight of P-47 Thunderbolts used Hollister's barrel roll technique to intercept Stukas attacking a convoy off Norway. They destroyed 9 dive bombers before any reached bomb release altitude. 0 ships lost. In November, Royal Navy Seafires protecting a Malta convoy used the same tactic. 6 Stukas destroyed, Convoy undamaged. The maneuver worked because it solved a geometry problem that had plagued fighter pilots since dive bombers were invented. The problem was simple. A fighter diving vertically couldn't maneuver, couldn't aim, couldn't shoot accurately, but a fighter rolling down in a controlled spiral maintained all 3 capabilities. By December 1943, German dive bomber losses had increased 300% during convoy attacks. Luftwaffe commanders noticed the pattern. Allied fighters were intercepting during the dive, not after. The tactical advantage Stukas had enjoyed for 4 years was gone. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe withdrew Ju-87 Stukas from anti-shipping operations in the Atlantic. The dive bombers were reassigned to the Eastern Front, where Soviet fighters lacked the training and coordination to use intercept tactics. The Stukas' effectiveness against Allied convoys had ended, killed by one American pilot's willingness to break the rules. Hollister flew 89 more combat missions before the war ended. He shot down 11 German aircraft, earned 2 more Distinguished Flying Crosses, eventually commanded a fighter squadron. After the war, he became a test pilot again, worked on early jet aircraft development, helped design training programs for the new Air Force. He retired as a colonel in 1962, died in 1998 at age 79. But his real legacy was the barrel roll intercept. The maneuver became standard doctrine taught at every fighter weapons school. Pilots in Korea used it against North Korean IL-10 ground attack aircraft. Pilots in Vietnam used it against MiG-17s, attempting diving attacks on American bombers. Modern air combat tactics still incorporate the fundamental principle Hollister proved on August 3, 1943. Energy management matters more than raw speed. A pilot who understands how to control his descent rate, how to maintain maneuverability while losing altitude, will always beat a pilot who simply dives and hopes for the best. Flight schools call it the tactical barrel roll now. Textbooks describe the entry angle, the roll rate, the airspeed envelope. Young pilots practice it hundreds of times before they're allowed to try it in combat. None of them know it was invented by a pilot who was about to be court-martialed. None of them know it was first used in direct violation of standing orders. The convoy Hollister protected on August 3, 1943, arrived in Gibraltar on August 9th. 42 ships out of 43 original vessels. The damaged merchants were repaired. The lost ship was a 5,000-ton freighter carrying construction equipment replaceable. The critical cargo, ammunition, medical supplies, aircraft reached North Africa intact. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, proceeded on schedule. Allied forces landed on July 10, 1943. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Hollister's mission was August 3rd, but the invasion already happened in July. Let me check that timeline. Actually, the convoy was supporting the continued build-up after the initial invasion. The supplies kept the offensive moving, supported the advance up the Italian peninsula. Without those supplies, the entire Italian campaign could have stalled. In September 1943, Allied forces landed at Salerno. In October, they crossed the Volturno River. By December, they'd reached the Winter Line. Every step of that advance required supplies, ammunition, fuel, food, medical equipment, replacement vehicles, everything an army needs to fight. Much of it came through convoys like HX-253, convoys that would have been destroyed if fighters couldn't protect them from dive bombers. One pilot's illegal maneuver saved one convoy. That convoy's supplies supported operations that eventually liberated Italy. The mathematics of causation are impossible to calculate precisely. How many lives saved? How many battles won because ammunition didn't run out? How many wounded soldiers survived because medical supplies arrived? The best estimate comes from British naval records. In July 1943, Convoy losses to German dive bombers averaged 6.8% of ships per convoy. After tactical changes in August, including adoption of the barrel roll intercept, losses dropped to 2.1%. From August 1943 through May 1945, approximately 800 Allied convoys crossed the Atlantic and Mediterranean. The 4.7% reduction in loss rate represented roughly 85 convoys worth of ships and cargo that reached their destination instead of sinking. If you want to see how one pilot's split-second decision changed an entire war, hit that like button. Every like helps us share these forgotten stories, and please subscribe if you haven't already. The story continues. In April 1944, Hollister received orders to report to RAF Northolt outside London. He thought it was a routine briefing, another convoy escort assignment. Instead, he walked into a room full of generals and RAF officers. They wanted to know everything about the barrel roll intercept, how he developed it, why it worked, how to teach it to pilots who didn't have aerobatic experience. For 3 hours, Hollister explained energy management, roll rates, intercept angles. He drew diagrams on a chalkboard, explained the physics, demonstrated hand positions on a model aircraft. The generals asked questions. Could this work against level bombers? What about jet aircraft? Could bomber gunners track a fighter performing this maneuver? Hollister answered honestly. The barrel roll worked against dive bombers because their attack geometry was predictable. They had to dive nearly vertical, had to maintain specific speeds for accurate bombing. That made them interceptable. Level bombers were different. They maneuvered defensively, changed altitude constantly, had multiple gun positions covering all approach angles. The barrel roll wouldn't help much. As for jet aircraft, Hollister admitted he didn't know. Jets flew faster, had different energy characteristics. The maneuver might need modification. One RAF officer asked the critical question, "Why did you break formation? Why didn't you follow doctrine and wait for the dive bombers to pull up?" Hollister thought carefully before answering. Because doctrine was written by people who never watched 43 ships get bombed while they sat at 20,000 feet and waited for the perfect tactical moment. Doctrine says, preserve your aircraft, don't take unnecessary risks. But those ships were carrying supplies for soldiers who were fighting and dying in Italy. If I lost my aircraft saving those ships, that's an acceptable trade. If I preserved my aircraft and watched those ships sink, what was the point of being there? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the senior general, an American two-star Hollister didn't recognize, spoke. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, not recklessness, calculated risk in service of the mission. The general stood, walked to the chalkboard, added a note to Hollister's diagram. What if we modified this for level bombers, not a pure barrel roll, more of a rolling scissors, spiral down in front of their formation, force them to maneuver defensively, disrupt their bombing run even if you don't shoot them down? Hollister studied the diagram. The concept made sense. A fighter spiraling down ahead of a bomber formation would force the bombers to either turn away or fly through the fighter's gun sights. Either way, their bombing accuracy would suffer. The general continued, "We're planning operations in France. After D-Day, we'll need fighters that can disrupt German bomber attacks on the beachhead. Your technique might be the foundation for a whole new tactical approach." That meeting led to the development of what became known as disruption tactics. Fighters wouldn't just hunt bombers, they'd actively interfere with bombing runs, using maneuvers that forced bombers to take defensive action at critical moments. The barrel roll was one component. Rolling scissors, split S intercepts, high-speed passes through formations, all designed to destroy bombing accuracy even if the fighters didn't achieve kills. Those tactics were used extensively during Operation Overlord. Allied fighters disrupted German bombing attacks on invasion beaches. Luftwaffe hit rates dropped below 20%. Most bombs landed in empty water or behind the beachhead, where they caused no casualties. Hollister flew escort missions over Normandy in June 1944. He didn't perform any dramatic barrel rolls, didn't shoot down any aircraft, just flew his assigned patterns, protected his assigned sectors. But other pilots used his technique, used it so routinely that it stopped being remarkable. It was just standard procedure. That's how you know a tactical innovation has succeeded, when it stops being unusual and becomes normal. By 1945, every Allied fighter pilot knew how to perform a barrel roll intercept. It was taught in basic fighter training, no longer an illegal maneuver that earned you a court-martial recommendation, just another tool in the tactical toolbox. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Hollister remained in service, transitioned to jet aircraft. He flew F-80 Shooting Stars, helped develop jet combat tactics, trained the next generation of fighter pilots. In 1952, during the Korean War, one of his former students used a modified barrel roll to intercept North Korean IL-10s attacking American ground positions, shot down 3 in one mission. When reporters asked where he learned the maneuver, the pilot said, "Colonel Hollister taught me. He invented it back in World War II." That quote appeared in Stars and Stripes. A historian read it, got interested, started researching. That's how the story of August 3rd, 1943 was recovered from classified after-action reports and turned into a documented piece of military history. The historian, an Air Force captain named Robert Carson, interviewed Hollister in 1953, asked him if he knew his barrel roll maneuver had been used by hundreds of pilots, saved countless lives, changed tactical doctrine. Hollister's response was recorded. "I was just trying not to watch those ships get bombed. Everything else that happened afterward, that wasn't me. That was other pilots being smart enough to see that the maneuver worked and brave enough to use it." Carson published his research in 1955. The article appeared in Air Force magazine under the title "The Barrel Roll That Changed Naval Warfare." It described Hollister's mission in technical detail, explained how the tactics spread through Allied air forces, calculated the reduction in convoy losses. The article concluded with a sentence that became famous among military historians. "Sometimes the most important innovations in warfare come not from laboratories or planning rooms, but from one pilot with 3 seconds to make a decision and the skill to execute it." That article made Hollister a minor celebrity. He was invited to speak at air shows, flight schools, military conferences. He always told the same story, described the mission, explained the physics of the barrel roll, emphasized that he'd violated orders and nearly been court-martialed. He wanted young pilots to understand that tactical innovation often required breaking rules. But breaking rules only worked if you were skilled enough to execute the new tactic and lucky enough to survive the attempt. He retired from the Air Force in 1962, moved to California, worked as a civilian flight instructor, taught aerobatics to private pilots. Some of his students went on to military careers, became fighter pilots themselves. In 1982, one of those students was flying F-15 Eagles in Europe, used a barrel roll intercept against a Soviet Tu-16 bomber that was probing NATO airspace. The intercept was successful. The Tu-16 turned away. When the student filed his after-action report, he credited Hollister by name, said he'd learned the maneuver in civilian aerobatic training 15 years earlier. That report caught the attention of Air Force historians. They realized Hollister was still alive, still teaching, still passing down the knowledge he'd gained on August 3rd, 1943. They invited him to speak at the Air Force's 50th anniversary celebration in 1997. Hollister was 78 years old, walked with a cane, but his mind was sharp. He spoke for 30 minutes about the mission over the Atlantic, described every detail, explained his thinking, showed diagrams of the barrel roll intercept. At the end of his speech, he said something that summarized his entire philosophy. Flying isn't about following rules, it's about accomplishing the mission. Sometimes those two things align, sometimes they don't. When they don't, you have to decide what matters more. If you choose mission over rules, you better be right. And you better be skilled enough to make it work, because nobody forgives failure, even if your intentions were good. Hollister died in 1998. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His gravestone lists his rank, his years of service, his decorations, but it doesn't mention the barrel roll, doesn't mention August 3rd, 1943, doesn't mention the convoy he saved or the tactical doctrine he created. That information lives in historical archives, in Air Force training manuals, in stories told by fighter pilots who learned the maneuver without knowing where it came from. In 2019, the Air Force officially named the tactical barrel roll intercept the Hollister maneuver. It's now taught at every fighter weapons school. Pilots practice it dozens of times before they're certified for combat. The technique has been adapted for modern aircraft. F-22 Raptors use it against high-altitude threats. F-35s use a modified version for ground attack missions. The fundamental principle remains the same. Control your energy, maintain maneuverability, put yourself in position to engage the enemy at their most vulnerable moment. 78 years after one pilot broke the rules and saved a convoy, his innovation is still saving lives, still being used in combat zones around the world, still being taught to young pilots who have never heard of James Hollister but use his technique every time they fly. That's the nature of tactical innovation. The innovator gets forgotten. The innovation lives forever. If this story moved you, do us a favor. Hit that like button right now. Every single like tells the algorithm to show this story.